The air in the old Boston church felt heavy, as though the weight of centuries pressed down on my shoulders. The stained glass windows cast fractured beams of color across the pews, crimson, sapphire, and gold, painting my white wedding dress in hues that felt more like a warning than a blessing. I stood before the altar, the satin of my gown clinging to my skin. But my heart was a stone, sinking deeper with every word the priest intoned. My hands trembled as I clutched the bouquet of lilies, their scent sharp and cloying, a cruel reminder of the funeral I'd attended years ago, my mother's. I was Clara Bennett, 29 years old, and today I was marrying Ethan Caldwell, a man I barely knew, a billionaire whose name carried more weight than his heart ever could. My father, William Bennett, stood in the front row, his face a mask of relief rather than joy. He'd orchestrated this union to save his crumbling company, a desperate deal to pull Bennett Industries back from the brink of bankruptcy. I was the price, a daughter traded for a lifeline. The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't let him down. Not after everything he'd lost. Not after Mom. Ethan stood beside me, his presence as cold as the marble beneath our feet. His black tuxedo was impeccable, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, but his eyes, those pale gray eyes, never met mine. They were fixed on some distant point, as if I were nothing more than a formality, a checkbox on his endless list of acquisitions. The priest's voice droned on, speaking of love and unity, words that felt hollow in this sacred space. When it came time for the vows, I forced the words out, my voice barely above a whisper. I do. They tasted like ash on my tongue. Ethan's response was steady, mechanical. I do. He slid the ring onto my finger, a platinum band studded with diamonds that glittered like ice. His touch was frigid, devoid of warmth, and as he leaned in, his breath brushed my ear. This is just a deal, Clara, he whispered, his voice low and cutting. Don't expect anything more. The words sliced through me, sharper than any blade, and I felt the weight of the ring on my finger like a shackle, binding me to a man who saw me as nothing more than a contract. The congregation applauded, a polite ripple of sound that echoed through the church, but their whispers followed me like shadows. She's just a pawn, someone murmured. A pretty little thing to save the Bennett name, another voice hissed. I kept my head high, my smile frozen in place, but inside, I was crumbling. I wasn't a bride. I was a commodity, sold to the highest bidder in a world where money trumped love, where power trumped family. The thought made me want to scream, to tear off this dress and run. But I couldn't. Not for my father's sake. Not when he'd already lost so much. I thought of my mother, Lydia, her gentle hands brushing my hair as she told me stories of true love, of knights and princesses who fought for each other. She'd always said I was strong, that I'd find my own fairy tale someday. But as I stood here, bound to a man who didn't even look at me, I felt like I'd failed her. I felt like I'd failed myself. And then there was the deeper pain, the one I carried like a scar on my soul. The memory of my son, the baby I'd lost 10 years ago. I'd named him Thomas, though I'd never had the chance to hold him. The doctors told me he'd been stillborn, a tragedy I'd never fully recovered from. That loss haunted me now, a ghost that lingered in the spaces between my breaths, reminding me of all I'd never have. The ceremony ended, and Ethan took my hand, his grip firm but impersonal, as he led me down the aisle. The guests stood, their applause a hollow sound, and I caught my father's eye as we passed. His smile was tight, his eyes glistening with something that might have been gratitude or guilt. I couldn't tell anymore. Outside, the late afternoon sun was blinding, and the flash of cameras assaulted us as we stepped into the courtyard. Reporters shouted questions, their voices a cacophony of greed. Mr. Caldwell, what does this marriage mean for Caldwell Industries? Miss Bennett, how does it feel to marry one of Boston's most eligible bachelors? I kept my gaze, forward, my smile a mask, but inside, I was screaming. Ethan guided me to the waiting Rolls-Royce, his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that felt more like a command than a comfort. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing us in a bubble of silence, and I stared out the tinted window as the car pulled away. The city blurred past, gray buildings, flashing lights, a world that didn't care about my pain. I turned the ring, on my finger, feeling its weight, its edges digging into my skin. It wasn't a symbol of love. It was a reminder of my captivity. "Don't try to change me, Clara," Ethan said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. I turned to him, startled, and found his gray eyes fixed on me at last. They were cold, unyielding, like a winter storm. "I don't do love. I don't do family. This marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more." His words were a final blow, stripping away the last shred of hope I'd clung to. I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't want this either, but the lump in my throat choked the words. Instead, I turned back to the window, my fingers tightening around the ring until my knuckles turned white. I was Clara Caldwell now, a name that meant nothing to me. A wife in title only, bound to a man who saw me as a means to an end. But as the car sped through the city, I made a silent vow of my own, not to him, but to myself. I would survive this. I would find a way to reclaim my life, to honor my mother's memory, to heal the wounds of my past. Even if it meant facing the man who'd just become my husband, and the secrets he might be hiding. The elevator ride to Ethan's penthouse felt like an eternity, the silence between us thicker than the polished steel walls that surrounded us. I stood as far from him as the small space allowed, my hands still clutching the bouquet of lilies, their petals bruised from my nervous grip. Ethan stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his gray eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the door as they ticked upward. Floor 48, 49, 50. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped out into a world that felt as foreign as the man beside me. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern luxury, all glass and marble, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of Boston's skyline. The city lights glittered like a sea of stars, but there was no warmth in this place. The air was sterile, scented with leather and expensive cologne, and the furniture, sleek and angular, looked more like art pieces than objects meant for comfort. It was a space designed to impress, not to live in, and I felt like an intruder, a smudge on its pristine surface. Ethan didn't look at me as he strode across the room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped at a door on the far side of the living area and gestured toward it with a curt nod. "You'll stay here," he said, his voice as cold as the gray walls that surrounded us. "I don't need you in my room, or my life." The words landed like a slap, sharp and humiliating. But there was a flicker of relief beneath my hurt. At least I wouldn't have to share a bed with a man who saw me as nothing more than a business transaction. I stepped into the room, and the door clicked, shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. The space was smaller than the main living area, but no less luxurious, with a king-sized bed draped in charcoal linens and a sleek dresser that gleamed under the recessed lighting. A single window offered a sliver of the city view, but the room felt like a cage, its elegance a mockery of my captivity. I set the bouquet on the dresser, the lilies drooping now, their white petals curling inward as if they, too, wanted to escape. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my wedding dress pooling around me like a shroud, and for a moment I let myself crumble. The tears came silently, hot and bitter, streaking down my cheeks as I buried my face in my hands. I thought of my mother, Lydia, her warm smile and gentle voice, the way she'd always known how to make me feel safe. She'd been gone for 3 years, taken by cancer, but her absence still felt like a fresh wound. And then there was Thomas, my baby boy, the child I'd lost before I'd even had the chance to hold him. The doctors had told me he was stillborn, a tragedy they couldn't explain. But the pain of that loss had never dulled. It lived in me, a constant ache, a reminder of all I'd never have. I forced myself to stand, wiping my tears with the back of my hand, and began to unpack the small suitcase I'd brought. I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself from the weight of this day. As I opened the suitcase, my fingers brushed against a familiar object. The music box my mother had given me before she died. It was a simple thing, carved from cherry wood, with a tiny ballerina that spun to the tune of Clair de Lune. I hadn't opened it in years, but I'd brought it with me, a piece of her to keep me grounded in this cold, unfamiliar place. I lifted the lid, and the soft, haunting melody filled the room. Each note a memory of my mother's laughter, her touch, her love. But as the ballerina twirled, a small piece of paper slipped from beneath her base, fluttering to the floor. I bent to pick it up, my heart pounding as I unfolded it. The handwriting was my mother's, delicate and precise, but the words made my breath catch in my throat. "Your son is still alive." The room spun, the music box's melody warping into a discordant hum as I read the note again, my hands trembling. Alive? How could that be? The doctors had told me Thomas was gone, that there was nothing they could do. I'd grieved for him, mourned him, carried his loss like a stone in my chest for 10 years. But my mother's words, her final message to me, ignited a spark of hope so fierce it terrified me. If Thomas was alive, where was he? And why had she kept this from me until now? I turned to the door, my mind racing, and before I could stop myself, I marched back into the living room where Ethan stood, pouring himself a glass of scotch at the bar. "What do you know about my son?" I demanded, my voice shaking but firm, the note clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Ethan froze, his glass halfway to his lips, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Don't believe in delusions, Clara," he said, his tone sharp. But there was a tremor beneath it, a crack in his icy facade. He set the glass down with a deliberate thud and turned away, as if dismissing me would erase my question. But I wasn't going to let him off that easily. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, the note burning in my hand. "Tell me the truth, Ethan. Do you know something about my son?" He didn't answer, but I caught the faint sound of his voice as he walked toward his study, speaking into his phone in a low, urgent tone. "No, she can't know about the boy," he said, his words barely audible through the door. "Keep him safe." The blood drained from my face, my knees buckling as I leaned against the wall for support. Ethan knew something he didn't want me to find out, and as the melody of Clair de Lune echoed in my mind, I made a decision. I would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost me. I would find my son, even if it meant tearing down the walls of this marriage, and the man who'd built them. The ballroom at the Fairmont Copley Plaza glittered like a jewel, its chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over the sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. I stood at the edge of the room, the sapphire blue dress Ethan had chosen for me clinging to my curves, its neckline plunging just enough to make me feel exposed. I'd never felt more out of place, a small-town girl thrust into the glittering world of Boston's elite, where every smile hid a dagger, and every word was a weapon. Ethan stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my elbow, a gesture that looked possessive, but felt like a leash. "Smile, Clara," he murmured, his voice low and commanding. "They're watching." I forced my lips into a curve, but it felt more like a grimace than a smile. The charity gala was a spectacle of wealth, a fundraiser for some cause I couldn't remember, but the true purpose here was clear: to see and be seen. Ethan needed to project the image of a stable, respectable man, and I was the prop meant to sell that illusion. The thought made my stomach twist, but I kept my head high, my eyes scanning the crowd for a familiar face. I found her in the corner, her silver hair catching the light. My mother, Lydia, sitting alone with a glass of champagne, her expression a mix of pride and sorrow. I excused myself from Ethan's side, ignoring the flicker of irritation in his gray eyes, and made my way to her. "Mom," I said softly, sinking into the chair beside her. She turned to me, her smile tremulous, and I saw the lines of worry etched into her face. She was still beautiful, even after all the grief she'd endured. My father's betrayal, my brother's estrangement, my own struggles. But tonight, she looked fragile, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her glass. "You look stunning." "Clara," she said, her voice warm but strained. "But you don't look happy." Her words pierced me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to tell her everything, the coldness of my marriage, the note I'd found in the music box, the suspicion that Ethan was hiding something about my son. But I couldn't burden her, not when she'd already carried so much. Instead, I reached for the shawl slipping from her shoulders and draped it back over her, my fingers lingering on the soft cashmere. "I'll be okay, Mom," I said, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I miss you." Lydia's hand covered mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "Be careful, Clara," she whispered, her eyes darting toward Ethan, who was now deep in conversation with a group of investors across the room. "Ethan Caldwell isn't a man you can trust. He's built his empire on secrets, and secrets have a way of destroying everything." Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but before I could press her for more, a shadow fell over us. I looked up to see a woman in a crimson gown, her lips curled in a sneer, her eyes glittering with malice. "Well, if it isn't the new Mrs. Caldwell," she purred, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're quite the accessory, aren't you? A pretty little puppet for Ethan to parade around." The words hit me like a slap, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. I wanted to snap back, to tell her I wasn't a puppet, but my throat tightened, and I couldn't find my voice. Lydia squeezed my hand, her gaze steady. "Ignore her, Clara," she said softly, but the woman's laughter lingered as she sauntered away, her words echoing in my mind. I returned to Ethan's side, my forced smile back in place, but the whispers followed me like a swarm of bees. "She's just a prop," someone murmured. "A desperate move to save the Bennett name," another voice hissed. Each comment was a needle, pricking at my pride, and I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. I thought of the note in the music box, "Your son is still alive," and the suspicion that had taken root in my heart. Was Ethan hiding my son from me? And if he was, what kind of man would do that to the woman he'd just married? The night took a darker turn. When my phone buzzed with a notification, I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking as I read the headline. "Ethan Caldwell accused of abandoning illegitimate child." The article was a vicious smear, filled with half-truths and speculation, but it sent a ripple of shock through the room. Guests began to whisper more openly, their eyes darting between me and Ethan, and I felt the air grow heavy with accusation. Ethan's grip on my arm tightened, his jaw clenching as he scanned the crowd, his expression a mask of controlled fury. "Did you say something to the press?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, his gray eyes boring into mine. The accusation stung, and I yanked my arm free, my own anger flaring to life. "I didn't say anything," I snapped, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "But if you have a child, Ethan, you should do the right thing." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes, a crack in his icy facade, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You don't know anything, Clara," he said, his tone final. But there was a tremor beneath it, a hint of something he wasn't saying. I turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze, and made my way to the balcony, the cool night air a relief against my flushed skin. The city stretched out before me, a tapestry of lights and shadows, and I gripped the railing, my mind racing. My mother's warning, the article, Ethan's reaction, it all pointed to a truth I couldn't ignore. He was hiding something big, and I was determined to find out what it was. I thought of my son, the baby I'd grieved for 10 years, and a fire ignited in my chest. I wouldn't let Ethan, or anyone, keep me from the truth. Not anymore. The penthouse felt like a tomb as I sat in the living room, the crackling fire, in the hearth, doing little to warm the chill that had settled in my bones. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city beyond a blur of gray and shadow, mirroring the storm raging inside me. I clutched a mug of chamomile tea, its steam rising in delicate curls, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying the events of the charity gala, the cruel whispers, the damning article, Ethan's cold accusation. And beneath it all, the note from my mother's music box burned in my memory. "Your son is still alive." The words were a lifeline and a torment, a fragile thread of hope I was terrified to pull. Ethan had retreated to his study after we returned, his silence louder than any words. I'd wanted to confront him again, to demand answers about the child. The article had mentioned, but the look in his eyes, a mix of anger and something I couldn't name, had stopped me. Instead, I sat here, the firelight flickering across my face, my wedding ring glinting like a cruel reminder of the life I'd been forced into. I was still in the sapphire dress from the gala, its fabric crumpled now, a stark contrast to the polished facade I'd worn all evening. I felt raw, exposed, as if the world could see every crack in my armor. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me from my thoughts, the sound slicing through the quiet like a blade. I set the mug down with a clatter, my hands trembling as I reached for the device. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something, a gut instinct perhaps, told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Clara Bennett? Or should I say Mrs. Caldwell?" The voice on the other end was smooth, dripping with malice, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "This is Richard Harrow. I believe we have some mutual interest to discuss." Richard Harrow. I knew the name, Ethan's business rival, a man notorious for his ruthlessness in the corporate world. My grip tightened on the phone, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to help you." "Clara," Richard purred, his tone laced with mock sympathy. "You see, I know a secret about your dear husband. A secret that might interest you. Did you know Ethan Caldwell is the father of your son?" The words hit me like a punch, stealing the air from my lungs. My son. Thomas. The baby I'd thought I'd lost 10 years ago. "You're lying," I whispered, but my voice cracked, betraying the hope that surged within me. "Oh, I'm not," Richard said, his laughter cold and sharp. "Ethan met you 10 years ago at a party in New York. You were both drunk and, well, let's just say the consequences were more permanent than either of you expected. When you gave birth, Ethan made sure the baby, Henry, I believe he's called now, was taken away. He paid off the doctors to tell you the child was stillborn, then sent him to a foster family to avoid a scandal. Quite the noble act, don't you think?" Richard's voice was a venomous hiss, each word sinking deeper into my heart. "If you don't believe me, ask Ethan. But if he doesn't come clean, I'll make sure the world knows. Unless he pulls out of the merger I want." I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my hand, landing on the rug with a soft thud as I pressed my hands to my mouth, a sob breaking free. Henry. My son had a name. He was alive. And Ethan, my husband, the man I'd vowed to stand beside, had taken him from me. The betrayal was a knife in my chest, twisting with every heartbeat. I thought of the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the empty nursery I'd never had the chance to fill, the grief that had defined me for a decade. All of it, a lie. I stood, my legs shaky, and stormed toward Ethan's study, the door slamming, open with a force that echoed through the penthouse. He looked up from his desk, his gray eyes narrowing as he saw the fury on my face. "What do you know about my son?" I demanded, my voice raw, tears streaming down my cheeks. I held up the note from the music box, my hand trembling. "Tell me the truth, Ethan. Is he alive? Is he Henry?" For a moment, Ethan's composure faltered, his face paling as he stared at the note. But then his mask slipped back into place, his expression hardening. "You're letting your grief make you irrational, Clara," he said, his tone clipped. But there was a tremor beneath it, a crack in his armor. "Your son is gone. Don't let Harrow manipulate you with lies." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, my voice breaking as I stepped closer, my hands clenched into fists. "Richard told me everything. How you met me 10 years ago. How you took my son away. How you paid the doctors to tell me he was dead. How could you do that to me, Ethan? How could you take him from me?" My voice cracked, the pain spilling out in waves, and I saw something shift in Ethan's eyes. Guilt, raw and unguarded, before he turned away, his shoulders tense. "I did what I had to do," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "I couldn't let a scandal destroy everything I'd built. Henry was better off with a family who could give him a normal life, away from the vultures of this world." He turned back to me, his gaze piercing. "I didn't want him to grow up under the scrutiny I've lived with my entire life." His words were a confession, a confirmation of Richard's claims, and they shattered me. "You stole 10 years of my life," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and grief. 10 years of being a mother. I can't live with a man who has no honor." I turned on my heel, the room spinning as I stumbled back to my own space, my heart a wreckage of betrayal and hope. Henry was alive. My son was alive. And I would find him, even if it meant tearing down Ethan Caldwell and everything he stood for. The drive to the quiet suburb outside Boston felt like a journey to another world, one far removed from the glittering penthouses and charity galas of Ethan's life. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the late morning sun casting a pale, hesitant light over the modest houses that lined the neighborhood. My hands gripped the steering wheel of the rental car, my knuckles white, as I followed the address Richard had given me. Every mile brought me closer to Henry, my son, the child I'd mourned for 10 years, the child Ethan had stolen from me. My heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread, the weight of his betrayal, still raw, a wound that bled with every breath. I pulled up to a small, weathered house with a sagging porch and a tricycle abandoned in the front yard. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown. But there was a warmth here that Ethan's penthouse lacked. A sense of life, of family. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaky, and smoothed the wrinkles from my sweater, a simple gray one I'd chosen to replace the sapphire dress from the gala. I wanted to look like a mother, not a trophy wife, when I met my son for the first time in a decade. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing a tired-looking woman in her 40s, her apron dusted with flour. "You must be Clara," she said, her voice soft but wary. "I'm Ellen, Henry's foster mom. Come in." I followed her inside, my heart in my throat, and there he was, Henry, sitting at a small table in the living room, a coloring book spread out before him. He was 10 years old now, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a shy smile that mirrored my own. But it was his eyes, those pale gray eyes, so like Ethan's, that stopped me in my tracks. There was no doubt. This was my son. "Henry," Ellen said gently. "This is Clara. She's a friend." I knelt in front of him, my hands trembling, as I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box, a set of wooden blocks I'd bought on the way, the kind I'd always imagined buying for Thomas. "I thought you might like these," I said, my voice breaking as I handed him the gift. Henry's face lit up, his smile widening. "Thanks, Miss Clara. You're pretty," he said, his words so innocent, so pure, that tears welled in my eyes. We spent the next hour building a tower together, his laughter filling the room as we played, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt whole. Henry told me about his dreams, how he wanted to be an astronaut, how he'd always wondered about his real parents. I draw pictures of them sometimes, he said, showing me a sketch of a man and woman holding hands with a little boy. I think they'd be nice, like you. His words broke my heart, and I wanted to tell him the truth, that I was his mother, that I'd never stopped loving him. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew he was safe. The fragile peace shattered when my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at the screen, my blood running cold as I read the headline. Ethan Caldwell, linked to death of businessman William Bennett. The article was a vicious lie, claiming Ethan had orchestrated my father's death to secure the merger with Bennett Industries. It was Richard's doing, I knew it. Another attempt to destroy Ethan, to turn public opinion against him. The news sent a ripple of panic through me, knowing the damage this would do to Ethan's company, to his reputation. Caldwell Industries' stock was already plummeting, the fallout immediate and brutal. I stepped outside to call Ethan, my hands shaking as I dialed his number, but before I could speak, another call came through. Richard Harrow. His voice was a venomous purr, laced with triumph. "Enjoying your little reunion, Clara?" he asked, and my stomach dropped. "Leave Ethan now, or I'll make sure the world knows the truth about Henry, and I'll destroy your entire family while I'm at it." I gripped the phone, my mind racing. Richard wasn't just targeting Ethan. He was coming for me, for Henry, for everything I held dear. The call ended, and moments later, a text arrived. A photo of Henry playing in the yard, taken from a distance with a message. "Leave, or the boy won't be safe." The threat was clear, a knife to my heart, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. Richard wasn't bluffing. He'd already proven his willingness to ruin lives, to spread lies about my father's death, to use Henry as a pawn in his vendetta against Ethan. I looked back through the window at Henry, his small hands stacking the blocks I'd given him, his laughter a melody I'd waited a decade to hear. I couldn't let Richard touch him. I wouldn't. But leaving Ethan meant abandoning the only lead I had to understanding why he'd taken Henry from me, why he'd lied for so long. It meant walking away from the man who, despite his betrayal, was Henry's father. A man I was starting to see in a new light. A man who might be capable of redemption. I thought of my mother, Lydia, and her words at the gala. Secrets have a way of destroying everything. She'd been right, but I wouldn't let those secrets destroy my son. I had to protect Henry, no matter the cost. I returned to the living room, my resolve hardening as I watched Henry play. I wouldn't leave. Not yet. I would stay and fight, for Henry, for the family I'd lost and found again. Richard Harrow thought he could break me, but he didn't know the strength of a mother's love. I would find a way to keep Henry safe, even if it meant facing down Ethan, Richard, and the entire world. Because Henry was my son, and I would never lose him again. The rain came down in sheets, a relentless torrent that soaked through my sweater and plastered my hair to my face as I stood on the deserted street outside the foster home. The street lamp above cast a dim, flickering glow, its light fractured by the falling water, and I shivered, not from the cold, but from the storm of emotions raging inside me. Henry was safe inside with Ellen, his foster mother, but Richard's threat echoed in my mind. Leave, or the boy won't be safe. I couldn't let that monster anywhere near my son, but I also couldn't walk away from Ethan without answers. I needed to know why he'd taken Henry from me, why he'd lied for 10 years, and whether he could ever be the father our son deserved. Headlights cut through the darkness, and Ethan's black SUV pulled up beside me, the engine idling with a low growl. He stepped out, his tailored coat drenched in seconds, his gray eyes stormy as they locked onto mine. "What the hell are you doing here, Clara?" he demanded, his voice sharp over the roar of the rain. He slammed the car door, his movements tense, and I saw the strain in his face, the weight of the lies, the scandal, the empire he was fighting to save. But I didn't care about his empire. I cared about my son. "I found Henry," I said. My voice raw, the rain mixing with the tears on my face. "He's my son, Ethan. My son. And you took him from me. You let me think he was dead for 10 years. Why? Why did you do it?" My voice broke, the pain spilling out, and I took a step toward him, my hands clenched into fists. "You don't deserve to be his father. You don't deserve him." Ethan's face twisted, a flash of guilt crossing his features before his expression hardened. "You have no idea what I've done for him," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "I've sent money to that family every month since he was born. I made sure he had a normal life, away from the vultures who would have torn him apart if they knew he was mine. I didn't want him to grow up like I did, under a microscope, judged for every move. I thought I was protecting him. Protecting. Him?" I shouted, my voice rising as I stepped closer, the rain soaking us both. "You stole him from me. You let me grieve for a child who was alive, Ethan. You let me suffer, thinking I'd failed him, thinking I'd lost him forever. That's not protection, that's cruelty." My chest heaved, the anger and grief pouring out, and I saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, a crack in his icy facade. But I wasn't done. "Richard knows, Ethan. He's threatening Henry. He sent me a picture of him playing in the yard. Said he'd hurt him if I didn't leave you. What are you going to do about it?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might turn away, retreat back into the cold shell he'd built around himself. But then he spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. "I didn't want this. Clara, I didn't want any of this, but I can't let Harrow hurt him. I won't." He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine, and I saw something new in them. Determination, a fire I hadn't seen before. "I'll fix this. I'll make it right." "How?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "How can you fix 10 years of lies? How can you fix what you've done to me? To us?" Ethan's gaze dropped, the rain dripping from his hair. And when he looked up, there was a resolve in his eyes that made my breath catch. "I'll tell the truth," he said, his voice steady despite the storm. "I'll go public. I'll tell the world Henry is my son, and I'll take the fall, whatever it costs. Richard won't have anything to hold over us if there's no secret left to expose." He paused, his expression softening, and he reached out, his hand hovering near my cheek before he let it fall. "I don't need you, Clara, but I need you to help me do this. For Henry." The words hit me like a wave, and I stared at him, the rain blurring my vision. He was willing to sacrifice everything, his reputation, his position, his empire, to protect our son. It was a choice I hadn't expected, a glimpse of the man he could be, the man I'd hoped he might become. But the pain was still there, a raw wound that wouldn't heal overnight. "I'll help you," I said finally, my voice barely audible over the rain. "But not for you. For Henry. He deserves better than both of us." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable, and we drove back to the penthouse in silence, the storm still raging outside. The next morning he called a press conference, and I stood beside him, my hand in his, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The rain had followed us, a steady drizzle that soaked the crowd gathered outside. Caldwell Industries. Ethan stepped up to the podium, his face pale but resolute, and I felt the weight of the moment settle over us. "I have a son," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "His name is Henry, and he's 10 years old. I've kept him a secret to protect him. But I was wrong. I've failed him. And I've failed his mother, Clara Caldwell. I'm stepping down as CEO of Caldwell Industries to focus on my family, to make things right. I'm sorry." The words echoed in the air, a confession that stripped him bare. and I felt the crowd's shock ripple through the space. I squeezed his hand, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I saw him not as the cold, calculating man I'd married, but as a father. A flawed, broken man trying to be better. Richard's threat was neutralized, his leverage gone, but the cost was steep. Ethan had lost his position, his power. But as we walked away from the podium, our hands still clasped, I felt something new between us. A fragile bond, a shared purpose. We were a family now, for better or worse, and I knew we'd fight for Henry together. The morning light filtered through the penthouse's kitchen window, casting a soft golden glow over the marble countertops and the small table where we sat. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile space I'd first encountered a week ago. Now, the air was filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and butter, the sizzle of bread in the pan a comforting rhythm. I stood at the stove, flipping slices of French toast, my hands steady despite the whirlwind of emotions that had defined the past few days. Henry sat at the table, his small legs swinging as he scribbled in a coloring book, while Ethan poured orange juice into 3 glasses, his movements careful, almost tentative. We were a family now, in a way I'd never imagined possible. After Ethan's press conference, he'd stepped down as CEO of Caldwell Industries, a sacrifice that had stripped Richard Harrow of his leverage and ensured Henry's safety. The fallout had been brutal. Headlines screamed of scandal, and the company's stock plummeted. But Ethan had taken it in stride, his focus shifting entirely to us. He'd brought Henry to the penthouse the very next day, and though the transition was still new, still fragile, I felt a flicker of hope each time I looked at my son. Henry was here, alive, and I was his mother again. "Mommy, can I have more syrup?" Henry asked, his voice bright, his gray eyes, so like Ethan's, sparkling with excitement. The word mommy hit me like a wave, and I nearly dropped the spatula, my heart swelling with a joy so fierce it hurt. I'd told him the truth 2 days ago, after we'd settled him into his new room, and hearing him call me that was a gift I'd never thought I'd receive. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I drizzled maple syrup over his French toast. He grinned, his cheeks smeared with cinnamon, and I couldn't help but laugh, the sound mingling with his giggles. Ethan set the glasses on the table, his gaze softening as he watched us. He'd been different since the press conference. Quieter, more present, as if the weight of his secrets had finally lifted. "You're a natural at this," he said, his voice low, a hint of awe in his tone. I glanced at him, surprised by the warmth in his expression, and for a moment, I saw the man he could be, a father, a partner, someone I might learn to trust. "I've had 10 years to dream about it," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. But there was no venom in it. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath my joy. But I was trying to move forward, for Henry's sake. The doorbell rang, a soft chime that broke the moment, and I wiped my hands on a dish towel as I went to answer it. My mother, Lydia, stood in the hallway, a small wooden box in her hands, her silver hair catching the light. She looked nervous, her eyes darting past me to the kitchen, but there was a determination in her posture that I recognized. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you." We settled in the living room, the box on the coffee table between us, while Ethan and Henry continued their breakfast in the kitchen, their laughter a distant melody. Lydia's hands shook as she opened the box, revealing a new music box, its surface carved with tiny stars. "I made this for Henry," she said, her voice soft. "I wanted him to have something from me, something to remind him of the family he's part of." She paused, her eyes filling with tears, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Clara, I owe you an apology. I knew about Henry, about what Ethan did. I found out a year after he was born, but I didn't tell you. I thought it would hurt you more to know the truth, to know he was out there and you couldn't have him. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Her words hit me like a punch, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She'd known, My own mother had known, and she'd kept it from me. The betrayal stung, but as I looked into her eyes, I saw the depth of her regret, the pain she'd carried for keeping that secret. I thought of the years I'd spent grieving, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, and I wanted to be angry, to lash out. But then I thought of Henry, of the laughter I'd heard just moments ago, and I realized that anger wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't give me back those years, but forgiveness might give me a future. I reached for her hand, my fingers wrapping around hers, and I squeezed gently. "I forgive you, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "I wish you'd told me, but I understand why you didn't. And now we have Henry back. That's what matters." Lydia's sob broke the silence, and I pulled her into a hug, her frail frame trembling against mine. We held each other for a long time, the weight of our shared pain lifting, replaced by a tentative hope. Later, we joined Ethan and Henry for a trip to my father's grave, a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The air was crisp, the ground soft from the recent rain, and I knelt to place a bouquet of lilies on the headstone, their scent a bittersweet reminder of the man who'd shaped my life, for better and worse. Ethan stood beside me, Henry's hand in his, and I felt a shift between us, a quiet understanding, a shared commitment to our son. "We'll do better, Clara," Ethan said, his voice low, his gray eyes meeting mine with a sincerity I hadn't seen before. "For Henry. For us." I nodded, my hand finding his, and I looked at my mother, who stood a few steps behind, a small smile on her lips. For the first time in years, I felt the pieces of my family coming together. Not perfect, not whole, but healing. And as Henry ran to me, his arms wrapping around my legs, I knew that this was the start of something new, a chance to build the life I'd always dreamed of, one breakfast at a time. The stained glass windows of the old Boston church glowed, with the same fractured light I remembered from my wedding day. But today, the colors felt different, warmer, softer, like a promise rather than a warning. Crimson, sapphire, and gold danced across the pews, casting a kaleidoscope of hues over the small gathering of family and friends who'd come to witness this moment. I stood at the front of the church, my hand in Ethan's, our fingers intertwined, with a quiet strength that had been absent the first time we'd stood here. Henry was between us, his small frame dressed in a tiny navy suit, his gray eyes, so like his father's, sparkling with excitement as he clutched a single white lily, a symbol of the new beginning we were creating. We'd returned to this church, the place where our marriage had begun with a cold, transactional vow to make a new promise. Not just to each other, but to Henry, to our family. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Ethan's decision to step down as CEO of Caldwell Industries had sent shockwaves through the business world, but it had also freed him in a way I hadn't expected. He'd sold his majority shares, using the proceeds to establish a trust fund for Henry and to support the foster care system that had kept our son safe for so long. The penthouse was on the market, and we'd bought a smaller house in a quiet suburb, a place with a backyard where Henry could play, a place that felt like a home. Today, we gather to renew our commitment, the priest said, his voice warm and steady, echoing through the church. Not only as husband and wife, but as a family, bound by love and the promise to do better. I glanced at Ethan, his profile sharp against the colored light, and saw the man he'd become. A father, a partner, someone who'd chosen us over his empire. He turned to me, his gray eyes softening, and I felt a flutter in my chest, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real. Henry tugged at my hand, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mommy, can I say something?" he asked, his cheeks flushed with excitement. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion, and he stepped forward, holding the lily up like a trophy. "I love my new family," he said, his words clear and bright. "I love Mommy and Daddy, and I'm happy we're together." The congregation let out a collective awe, and I felt tears prick at my eyes as I knelt to hug him, his small arms wrapping around my neck. Ethan joined us, his hand resting on Henry's back, and for a moment, we were a single unit, a family forged through pain and redemption. The ceremony was simple, a quiet reaffirmation of our vows, but it felt more sacred than our wedding day ever had. When it was over, we stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, the leaves a riot of red and gold, and I watched as Henry ran to my mother, Lydia, who waited with a smile that lit up her face. She'd been a rock through all of this, her forgiveness a balm to my wounded heart, and seeing her with Henry, her grandson, filled me with a gratitude I couldn't put into words. Back at the house, life began to take on a new rhythm. Henry started school, a small private academy with a playground he adored, and I watched him blossom, his laughter a constant melody in our home. He'd made friends quickly, his shy smile winning over his classmates, and I found myself volunteering at the school, helping with bake sales and story time, savoring every moment I got to be his mother. Ethan, too, was finding his place. He'd taken up consulting work, offering his expertise to nonprofits, a far cry from the corporate titan he'd once been. He was home more, helping Henry with homework, teaching him to ride a bike, and I saw the bond between them grow stronger with each passing day. One evening, as I tucked Henry into bed, I found a letter on the kitchen counter, the handwriting familiar. Father Michael, the priest who'd officiated both our wedding and our renewal ceremony. I opened it, my heart swelling as I read his words. I'm proud of you, Clara and Ethan. You've turned a moment of darkness into a beacon of light. Your family is a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. I set the letter down, my eyes misty, and felt Ethan's arms slip around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Thank you, Clara, he said, his voice low, a quiet intensity in his tone, for not leaving, for giving me a chance to be the man I should have been all along. I turned in his arms, looking up into his gray eyes, and saw the sincerity there, the love that had grown between us, slow and steady, like a seedling breaking through the earth. Thank you, Ethan, I replied, my voice soft but firm, for giving me a reason to stay. We stepped out onto the back porch, the night sky above us a canvas of stars, the city lights a distant glow on the horizon. Henry's laughter echoed from inside, where he'd convinced Lydia to read him one more story, and I leaned into Ethan, his warmth a comfort I'd come to cherish. I thought of my mother, of the lessons she'd taught me about strength and love, and I knew she was watching over us, smiling from above. I thought of my father, of the mistakes he'd made, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Henry burst out onto the porch, his pajamas rumpled, and threw his arms around us both. I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy, he shouted, his voice a burst of joy that filled the night. We laughed, pulling him into a hug, and as the stars shone above, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a future I couldn't wait to live. We walked back inside together, the door closing behind us, the church lights a memory that had led us here, to a new journey, a new family, a new beginning. If you've been touched by this journey of love, redemption, and family, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. It means the world to us. And if you want to join us for more heartfelt stories that inspire and uplift, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let's build a community where we can share in the power of second chances and the beauty of healing together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.